On the 3rd of February 2025, a Monday afternoon in Sheffield, England, security cameras inside All Saints Catholic High School recorded something that would shatter a community and expose fractures no one had prepared to see. The footage was grainy, time-stamped, clinical in its surveillance neutrality. At approximately 12:15 in the afternoon, in a school corridor bustling with students on their lunch break, a 15-year-old boy named Muhammad Umar Khan confronted another 15-year-old Harvey Wilgus. What followed lasted only seconds. Khan shoved Harvey aggressively. Then, reaching into his jacket, he produced a 13-centimeter serrated hunting knife and drove it twice into Harvey's chest. One of those blows pierced Harvey's heart. He collapsed within moments. Despite frantic efforts by teachers, paramedics, and police who rushed to the scene, Harvey Wilgus could not be revived. He was pronounced dead from his injuries. A 15-year-old boy, killed by a classmate in the middle of a school day. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This is a case that raises questions about how violence takes root in young lives, how institutions respond to warning signs, and what happens when friendship turns to fury. It is a story built on verified facts, courtroom testimony, and forensic evidence, and it demands we look closely at what went wrong and why. Harvey Wilgus was not an anonymous victim. He was remembered by those who knew him as someone who brought people together, a boy who wanted everyone to be friends. His family later described him as warm, funny, and caring, someone who had a unique ability to see the good in others. Harvey was in Year 10 at All Saints Catholic High School, a secondary school in Sheffield that served a diverse population of students. He was popular among his peers, not in the superficial sense, but because he genuinely cared about others. One of Harvey's teachers from primary school once said that Harvey never argued or had trouble with anybody. But if there was an argument happening around him, he would get involved trying to mediate. Sometimes that was the right thing to do, the teacher noted, and sometimes it was the wrong thing to do. In this case, it would cost him his life. Harvey's involvement in disputes was not driven by aggression, but by a desire to bring peace. Friends recalled that he often tried to diffuse tensions between groups of students, acting as a bridge rather than taking sides. This quality made him well liked, but it also placed him in situations where he became entangled in conflicts that were not originally his own. In late January of 2025, just weeks before his death, Harvey found himself drawn into one such conflict. A fight had broken out between two other students at All Saints. The details of that initial dispute remain unclear, but it was enough to create factions among students. Harvey and Muhammad Umar Khan, who had been friends up until that point, ended up on opposite sides. Friends of both boys later reported that their friendship soured rapidly in the days following that fight. An atmosphere of hostility replaced what had been camaraderie. Witnesses recall seeing the two boys exchange words in hallways and on social media. The exact content of their private messages was not fully disclosed in court, but prosecutors later revealed that there had been arguments and insults traded between them. Khan would later claim that he felt threatened by Harvey and by others who sided with him. Harvey, for his part, confided in friends that he was worried something might happen. On the morning of February 3rd, he told another student that he sensed trouble brewing. He reported to a teacher that Khan had pretended to reach for something in his trousers during a confrontation in science class, implying Khan might have a weapon. That report was passed along to school staff, but by the time anyone could act, the lunch break had begun and students were dispersing throughout the building. The tension between Harvey and Khan had escalated to a point where violence seemed, in hindsight, almost inevitable. But understanding how two 15-year-old boys reached that point requires looking beyond the immediate feud and into the histories they carried with them. Muhammad Umar Khan was born in November of 2009. He grew up in Sheffield, in what court documents and defense testimony later described as a deeply troubled home environment. According to evidence presented during his trial, Khan endured significant difficulties throughout his childhood. There were reports of physical and emotional abuse suffered by Khan and his siblings, as well as periods of malnourishment. His mother reportedly struggled with serious mental health issues, which compounded the instability at home. Khan himself had certain medical problems that made his life at school particularly difficult. Notably, He had to wear a urological catheter, a condition that caused him embarrassment and made him a target of bullying by other students. This eroded his self-esteem and contributed to a growing sense of isolation. Khan's difficulties at home and the bullying at school manifested in behavioral problems from a young age. He was described by teachers as disruptive and hot-tempered in class. By the time he reached secondary school, his behavior had escalated to violence. Only about 15 weeks before the stabbing of Harvey Wilgus, Khan had transferred to All Saints Catholic High School from another secondary school. Reports indicate that he had been involved in an assault on a fellow pupil at his previous school, which led to his transfer. His enrollment at All Saints was conditional. He was placed on a behavioral probation period with designated teachers monitoring him. For a time, it seemed that the intervention might be working. By early 2025, Khan had just passed that probation and appeared to be adjusting to the new school. However, between November of 2024 and January of 2025, there were at least 3 separate incidents of Khan becoming angry and aggressive toward others or damaging property at school. These incidents were documented by staff, but did not result in expulsion or additional police involvement. Perhaps most alarming was Khan's growing obsession with weapons, particularly knives. He started collecting them, taking photos and videos of himself posing with blades. During the trial, prosecutors revealed that Khan kept numerous images on his phone showing him holding large hunting knives and machetes. In one video, he brandished a knife in a manner that prosecutors described as menacing. Khan later claimed these images were meant to warn others not to mess with him, a form of self-protection in a world where he felt constantly under threat. Authorities, however, saw it differently. They interpreted the images as evidence of a fascination with violence, a thrill-seeking behavior that suggested something more dangerous was developing beneath the surface. In December of 2024, only 2 months before Harvey's murder, Khan's own mother became so alarmed by his behavior that she called the police. She had discovered a small axe hidden in Khan's school bag at home and feared what he might do with it. Police officers came to their home and confiscated the weapon. However, due to UK law at the time, they did not arrest or charge Khan. Possession of a blade was only illegal in a public place, and since the axe was found at home and Khan denied any intent to use it, the officers could not prove a crime had been committed. Instead, they gave Khan what was described as safety advice, essentially a stern warning about the dangers of carrying weapons. Khan was told not to do it again and was left in the care of his family. This incident would later become a focal point in debates about whether authorities missed an opportunity to intervene more forcefully. Could Khan have been redirected before tragedy occurred? Was the legal framework adequate to address situations like this, where a young person showed warning signs but had not yet committed a prosecutable offense in a public space? These questions hung over the case long after the verdict was delivered. On the morning of February 3, 2025, Muhammad Umar Khan left his home carrying a 13-centimeter serrated hunting knife. According to evidence presented at trial, he had purchased the knife online weeks earlier. In his own words, he bought it because it was scary. That morning, he tucked it into the pocket of his coat and went to school. Before leaving home, Khan took a photograph of himself holding the knife. Investigators later recovered this image from his phone. It showed Khan posing with the blade, his expression inscrutable. The photograph was time-stamped to the morning of the attack, providing prosecutors with evidence that Khan's decision to bring the weapon was deliberate and premeditated. Khan's internet search history, retrieved during the investigation, revealed additional troubling details. In the days and hours leading up to the attack, Khan had searched online for rage rooms, facilities where people can pay to smash objects in a controlled environment to release anger. Prosecutors argued that these searches indicated Khan was aware of his own rage and was seeking outlets for it, yet he chose to bring a knife to school instead. That same morning, Khan attended a science class scheduled for around 11:10. Harvey Wilgus was also in that class. Both boys arrived a few minutes late. According to the teacher and students present, the two squared up to each other almost immediately. Witnesses reported that one of the boys challenged the other to take this outside. The science teacher intervened and separated them before anything physical could occur. Harvey, visibly shaken, went straight to the assistant head of Year 10 to report what had happened. On his way, he confided in another student that something was about to happen. He told the staff member that Khan had pretended to reach for something in his trousers during the confrontation, implying Khan was acting as if he had a weapon on him. Harvey's report was noted, but in the chaotic environment of a large secondary school, immediate action was difficult. The lunch break was about to begin, and students would soon be dispersed throughout the building. Just after 12:10 in the afternoon, the lunch break began. Students flooded out of classrooms toward the cafeteria and courtyard. Harvey was seen chatting with his friends, trying to act normal and enjoy the break. But Khan was looking for him. Security cameras captured Khan prowling through the school halls, clearly on edge. At one point, footage showed Khan holding the knife inside his jacket as he walked near the cafeteria. Investigators later analyzed these recordings frame by frame, reconstructing Khan's movements in the minutes leading up to the attack. The footage showed Khan pacing, pausing, looking around corners. He appeared to be searching for someone. At approximately 12:15, Khan found Harvey in a corridor near the cafeteria. What happened next was captured on multiple camera angles. The grainy black and white footage played in court during the trial showed Khan approaching Harvey and shoving him aggressively. Harvey, caught off guard, stumbled backward. Khan then reached into his jacket, pulled out the knife, and stabbed Harvey twice in quick succession. One blow struck Harvey in the chest, piercing his heart. Harvey collapsed to the ground almost immediately. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. A nearby teacher, who had been monitoring the hallway, bravely intervened. She rushed toward Khan, shouting for him to stop. Khan, still holding the knife, backed away. Security cameras later showed him walking into the cafeteria, where he was seen pacing and gesturing in a manner some witnesses described as bizarre. Prosecutors would later argue that this behavior, which some interpreted as dancing or celebrating, indicated a lack of remorse. The defense countered that Khan was in shock, his mind unable to process what he had just done. In the chaotic minutes that followed, staff and students frantically tended to Harvey and alerted the authorities. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene. Despite efforts to save him, Harvey Wilgus lost consciousness within a minute of being stabbed and could not be revived. He was pronounced dead from his injuries shortly thereafter. A 15-year-old boy, killed by a classmate in the middle of a school day. The crime scene was secured and Khan was taken into custody without resistance. The investigation had begun. The investigation into Harvey Wilgus's murder was swift and methodical. South Yorkshire Police arrived at All Saints Catholic High School within minutes of the initial emergency call. The school was immediately placed on lockdown. Students and staff were instructed to remain in their classrooms while officers secured the scene and ensured there was no ongoing threat. Detectives from the Major Crimes Unit began their work almost immediately. The first priority was to preserve evidence. The corridor where Harvey had been stabbed was cordoned off. Forensic teams photographed the scene, collected blood samples, and documented the position of Harvey's body before paramedics moved him. The knife, which Khan had dropped after the attack, was recovered and bagged as evidence. It was a 13-centimeter serrated hunting knife, the kind marketed for outdoor use. Investigators later traced its purchase to an online retailer, confirming that Khan had ordered it weeks earlier. One of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case was the security camera footage. All Saints Catholic High School, like many secondary schools in the UK, had an extensive CCTV system covering hallways, entrances, and common areas. Investigators immediately requested access to the recordings from the morning and early afternoon of February 3rd. What they found was a detailed, time-stamped record of Khan's movements throughout the day. The footage showed Khan arriving at school that morning, attending classes, and then, during the lunch break, moving through the hallways with the knife concealed in his jacket. The cameras captured the moment he found Harvey, the shove, the stabbing, and Harvey's collapse. They also recorded Khan's behavior in the cafeteria afterward, which prosecutors would later argue demonstrated a disturbing lack of remorse. Digital forensics played a significant role in building the case. Investigators seized Khan's mobile phone and conducted a thorough analysis of its contents. What they discovered painted a troubling picture. Khan had taken numerous photos and videos of himself, posing with knives and other weapons. Some of these images showed him holding the very knife used to kill Harvey. His internet search history revealed searches for rage rooms and violence-related content. Text messages and social media exchanges between Khan and Harvey, as well as between Khan and other students, were reviewed to establish the context of their feud. While the exact content of some private messages remained undisclosed in court, it was clear that tensions had been escalating for weeks. Witness interviews were conducted extensively. Police spoke with students who had been present in the corridor during the attack, as well as those who had witnessed the confrontation in the science class earlier that morning. Teachers who had interacted with Khan and Harvey in the days leading up to the murder were also interviewed. These accounts helped investigators establish a timeline and understand the dynamics of the feud. One particularly important witness was the teacher who had intervened immediately after the stabbing. Her testimony provided crucial details about Khan's demeanor and actions in the moments following the attack. Within hours of the murder, Khan was arrested and taken into custody. Under UK law, juveniles accused of serious crimes are subject to specific legal protections, including restrictions on how they can be questioned and whether their identities can be publicly disclosed. Khan was initially held at a youth detention facility while the investigation continued. During his interrogation, which was conducted in the presence of an appropriate adult as required by law, Khan gave his version of events. He claimed that he had brought the knife to school for self-protection because he felt threatened by Harvey and others. He stated that he had not planned to use it, but that when Harvey confronted him in the corridor, he lost control. Investigators were skeptical of this account. The evidence suggested otherwise. The photograph Khan had taken of himself with the knife that morning, the CCTV footage showing him prowling the hallways in search of Harvey, and his internet searches all pointed toward premeditation. The decision to charge Khan with murder, rather than manslaughter, was made by the Crown Prosecution Service after reviewing the evidence. Under UK law, murder requires proof of intent to kill or cause grievous bodily harm. The prosecution believed they had sufficient evidence to demonstrate that Khan had intended to kill Harvey Wilgus. The trial was scheduled for August of 2025, 6 months after the murder. The trial of Muhammad Umar Khan opened at Sheffield Crown Court in early August of 2025. He was charged with the murder of Harvey Wilgus. Under UK law, juveniles accused of murder are tried in the Crown Court, the same venue used for adult defendants, but with certain procedural adaptations to account for their age. Khan, now 16 years old, appeared in court wearing a black hoodie. Observers noted that he appeared small and younger than his age, showing little emotion as proceedings began. The prosecution's case was straightforward and built on forensic evidence, CCTV footage, and digital records. The lead prosecutor argued that Khan had planned the attack, bringing a knife to school with the intent to harm Harvey. The evidence, they said, was overwhelming. The photograph Khan had taken of himself with the knife that morning demonstrated forethought. The CCTV footage showed him searching for Harvey during the lunch break. The internet searches for rage rooms indicated Khan was aware of his anger and chose violence instead of seeking help. The prosecution emphasized that Khan had ignored opportunities to de-escalate. A friend had sent him a message on the morning of the attack, urging him not to bring the knife to school. Khan had ignored that plea. During the science class confrontation, a teacher had separated the two boys, providing Khan with an opportunity to walk away. He chose not to. Instead, he armed himself and hunted Harvey down during the lunch break. Camera footage was a centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Jurors were shown video from inside the school. One clip from that morning showed Khan trying to provoke Harvey in the hallway, while Harvey appeared to remain calm in response. Most damning was the courtyard surveillance showing the stabbing itself. Jurors watched as Khan punched Harvey and then stabbed him twice before Harvey collapsed. The prosecution argued this was an act of retribution. Khan wanted to get back at Harvey for something in their feud. To further undermine Khan's claim of losing control, prosecutors brought up his behavior in the days and hours leading up to the killing. They revealed Khan's ominous internet searches and his interest in rage rooms. They highlighted that he had ignored a friend's plea to disarm on the day of the attack, indicating he was resolute about carrying the knife. When they searched Khan's phone and bedroom, They found a trove of weapons-related content, photos of Khan posing with a machete and other knives, video of him twirling a blade, and even a selfie where he held the very knife used to kill Harvey. All this, the prosecution said, pointed to premeditation and intent. The defense built a narrative of a bullied, broken boy who finally exploded. They claimed that Khan had endured a long period of bullying, poor treatment, and violence directed at him, and that these experiences built up one upon another until he lost control on that fateful day. According to the defense, Khan truly believed he was under threat. They said that morning's confrontation instilled genuine fear in Khan, leading him to arm himself for self-protection. Khan took the witness stand in his own defense, a rare move for someone accused of murder, especially a juvenile. Speaking softly and often clutching a fidget toy for comfort, Khan told the jury about the abuse and harassment he felt at school. He recounted being called racial slurs and being mocked for his catheter medical condition. He described feeling isolated and afraid, saying he was upset all of the time and suffered anxiety and sleeplessness as a result. Khan asserted that on multiple occasions he had been physically assaulted or threatened by other students. In one instance, he claimed a boy warned him he would stab him up, which left him terrified. The defense leaned on these accounts to justify why Khan started carrying a knife, not to be a thug, they said, but because he truly feared for his safety in a school environment that had failed to protect him. Crucially, the defense invoked the concept of loss of control, a partial defense to murder under UK law. They argued that Khan experienced a sudden and total breakdown of self-control due to an accumulation of provocations and a triggering incident. His lawyer phrased it poignantly. Harvey became the final straw that broke Khan. A consultant clinical psychologist had evaluated Khan and noted he had an anger management problem, as well as certain cognitive limitations. The court heard that Khan's intellectual abilities were in the very low average range, with particular weaknesses in processing language quickly. Under normal conditions, he could communicate and comprehend, but in high-pressure situations, his ability to think clearly might be severely impaired. Throughout the trial, Harvey's family sat in the courtroom listening to this painful testimony. Emotions ran high. Harvey's mother, Caroline, occasionally had to leave the courtroom in tears, unable to bear certain details. His sister, Sophie, a schoolteacher herself, later said of Khan, "He's a 15-year-old boy. We'd like to think that he didn't want to murder Harvey. He's just from a troubled background, and services have let him down." The jury deliberated for more than 14 hours before delivering its verdict on the 8th of August 2025. On the 8th of August 2025, the jury delivered its verdict. After more than 14 hours of deliberation, they found Muhammad Umar Khan guilty of Harvey Wilgus's murder by a majority of 11-1. Khan stood in the dock as the foreman announced the verdict. He showed no visible reaction, staring straight ahead. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Harvey's family weeping. Outside the courthouse, Harvey's family spoke to the media. His older sister, Sophie Wilgus, delivered a powerful statement on behalf of the family, describing her brother as full of life, a warm, funny, caring boy who had a unique ability to bring people together. She also extended thanks to the community for their support and vowed that in Harvey's memory, they would continue to speak out against knife crime. The conviction meant that Khan would face sentencing for murder, which in the UK carries a mandatory life sentence. However, because Khan was a juvenile at the time of the offence, the judge would have discretion in setting the minimum term he must serve before becoming eligible for parole. On the 22nd of October, Muhammad Umar Khan returned to Sheffield Crown Court for sentencing. By now, he was 16 years old. At the start of the hearing, Mrs. Justice Ellen Bowen made a consequential ruling. Given the seriousness of the crime and the public interest, she lifted the reporting restrictions on Khan's identity. This was an unusual step, as British courts often keep juveniles anonymous to protect their rehabilitation prospects. But the judge noted that Khan's age alone did not justify anonymity for such a grave offence. The public had a right to know who had committed this crime and under what circumstances. When Khan was brought into the dock, he was described as wearing a black hoodie. Appearing small and younger than his 16 years, he showed no emotion as proceedings began. When it came time for the judge's remarks, Mrs. Justice Ellen Bowen delivered a thorough and stern commentary on the case. She acknowledged that Khan had endured a difficult childhood and had been the victim of bullying. However, she noted that many young people face adversity without resorting to violence. The judge emphasized that Khan had made a choice to bring a knife to school, a choice that had lethal consequences. She highlighted Khan's history of carrying weapons, including on school grounds, and noted that the offense took place on school premises with numerous pupils and teachers present. These were all aggravating factors in the case. The judge gave the sentence detention for life with a minimum term of 16 years. In practical terms, this means Khan will serve at least 16 years in custody before he is even eligible for parole review. The judge clarified that Khan had already spent 259 days in custody pre-sentencing, which would count toward his term. This sentence was among the longest minimum terms handed down to a juvenile offender in recent years, reflecting the severity of the crime and the premeditation involved. The sentencing marked the end of the criminal proceedings, but it was far from the end of the story. Questions remained about how Khan had been able to purchase a large hunting knife online at the age of 15, how he had smuggled it into school undetected, and whether authorities had missed opportunities to intervene before the tragedy occurred. In the weeks following the sentencing, an independent review into the circumstances of Harvey's death was announced. The review aimed to investigate whether any warning signs were missed by authorities and what could be improved in the future. It would examine the role of schools, police, social services, and mental health providers in identifying and supporting at-risk young people. The case had highlighted gaps in the system, particularly around online sales of weapons to minors and the legal framework governing possession of blades in private spaces. The aftermath of Harvey Wilgus's murder rippled far beyond the courtroom. For Harvey's family, the verdict and sentencing provided a measure of justice, but it could not bring their son and brother back. In the months following his death, they became vocal advocates for knife crime prevention. Sophie Wilgus, Harvey's older sister, spoke at community events and to the media about the devastating impact of knife violence. She emphasized that Harvey had been a peacemaker, someone who wanted to bring people together, and that his death was a tragedy that should never have happened. The family worked with local organizations to promote awareness about the dangers of carrying knives and the importance of early intervention for young people at risk. Harvey's school, All Saints Catholic High School, also faced scrutiny. Questions were raised about whether staff had done enough to respond to warning signs in the days and weeks leading up to the murder. The school had placed Khan on a behavioral probation period when he first enrolled, and there had been documented incidents of aggressive behavior between November 2024 and January 2025. However, no action had been taken to remove Khan from the school or to implement more intensive support measures. In response to the tragedy, the school announced changes to its security protocols and behavior management systems. These included enhanced CCTV coverage, more rigorous bag checks at entrances, and additional training for staff on recognizing signs of potential violence among students. The school also established a memorial fund in Harvey's name to support anti-violence education programs. The case also sparked a broader conversation about knife crime in the UK. Knife-related offences, particularly among young people, have been a persistent issue in England and Wales. According to statistics from the Office for National Statistics, knife crime had been rising in certain areas, with young people both as victims and perpetrators. The murder of Harvey Wilgus became a focal point for advocates calling for stricter laws around the sale and possession of knives. One of the key issues highlighted by the case was the ease with which Khan had been able to purchase a large hunting knife online. UK law prohibits the sale of knives to anyone under the age of 18, but enforcement of this law in online sales is inconsistent. Many retailers rely on age verification systems that can be easily circumvented. Khan had ordered the knife weeks before the attack, and there is no evidence that the seller made any serious effort to verify his age. In response to cases like this, some advocacy groups have called for stricter regulations on online knife sales, including mandatory in-person verification of age at the point of delivery. Another issue raised by the case was the legal framework around possession of blades in private spaces. When Khan's mother called the police in December 2024 after finding an axe in his school bag, officers confiscated the weapon but did not arrest or charge Khan. At the time, possession of a blade was only illegal in a public place, meaning police had limited ability to intervene when weapons were found in homes. This incident prompted calls for changes to the law to give police greater powers to address situations where young people are found with weapons in private, particularly when there is evidence of intent to use them. The psychological dimensions of the case also attracted attention. Khan's defense had argued that he suffered from anger management issues and cognitive limitations that impaired his ability to control his actions. The prosecution had countered that Khan was fully aware of what he was doing and had planned the attack. This tension between personal responsibility and mental health or developmental issues is a recurring theme in cases involving young offenders. Experts in criminal psychology noted that adolescence is a period of heightened emotional volatility and impulsive behavior, but also pointed out that the vast majority of young people, even those facing significant adversity, do not resort to violence. Understanding what pushes a small minority over that line remains a challenge for researchers and practitioners. The case also intersected with debates about bullying and school safety. Khan's defense had painted a picture of a young person who felt unsafe and unsupported in his school environment. While the prosecution had challenged the extent and veracity of Khan's claims, there was no dispute that he had experienced some form of bullying and social exclusion. Advocates for anti-bullying measures argued that schools must do more to create safe environments where all students feel protected and supported. Others cautioned against using bullying as an excuse for violence, emphasizing that personal accountability cannot be erased by circumstances. For the community of Sheffield, the murder of Harvey Wilgus was a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the importance of vigilance. Memorials were held at All Saints Catholic High School and in the surrounding neighborhood. Students, teachers, and community members gathered to remember Harvey and to reflect on what could be done to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Flowers, cards, and tributes were left outside the school gates, transforming the entrance into a makeshift shrine. The trial and sentencing of Muhammad Umar Khan also raised questions about the juvenile justice system. Khan's life sentence with a minimum term of 16 years was one of the longest handed down to a juvenile in recent memory. Some observers argued that such a lengthy sentence reflected a punitive approach that prioritized public protection over rehabilitation. Others contended that the severity of the crime and the premeditation involved justified the sentence. The debate highlighted broader tensions in how society responds to crimes committed by young people, balancing accountability, rehabilitation, and public safety. The legacy of Harvey Wilgus's murder is multifaceted. On one level, it is a deeply personal tragedy for his family and friends, a loss that can never be fully comprehended or repaired. On another level, it is a case study in the complex intersection of youth violence, mental health, bullying, and institutional failure. It raises questions that society continues to grapple with. How do we protect young people from each other and from themselves? How do we identify and intervene with those at risk of committing violence before it is too late? What responsibilities do schools, police, social services, and parents bear in preventing tragedies like this? The independent review into Harvey's death, which was announced in the aftermath of the sentencing, aimed to provide some answers. The review examined the actions of all agencies involved with Khan and Harvey in the months leading up to the murder. It looked at whether opportunities for intervention were missed, whether communication between agencies was adequate, and whether the legal and policy frameworks in place were sufficient to address the risks posed by young people like Khan. Preliminary findings from the review suggested that while no single agency or individual could be held solely responsible, there were indeed gaps in the system. Khan's transfer from his previous school to All Saints had been managed as an administrative matter, with limited information shared about the severity of his behavioral issues. The behavioral probation period he was placed on was monitored, but there was no comprehensive risk assessment conducted that might have identified the escalating danger he posed. The incident in December 2024, when Khan's mother called the police about the axe, was another missed opportunity. While officers followed the law as it stood at the time, there was no follow-up with the school or with social services to assess whether Khan required more intensive support or monitoring. The review recommended changes to protocols for information sharing between schools, police, and social services, as well as revisions to the legal framework governing possession of weapons by minors. In the years since Harvey's murder, his family has worked tirelessly to ensure that his death was not in vain. They have campaigned for legislative changes, supported educational programs in schools, and shared their story publicly in the hope that it might prevent other families from experiencing similar loss. Harvey Wilgus, in particular, has become a prominent voice in the fight against knife crime, speaking at national conferences and meeting with policymakers to advocate for reform. For Muhammad Umar Khan, the future remains uncertain. He will spend his formative years and much of his adulthood in detention. Under the terms of his sentence, he will not be eligible for parole consideration until 2041, when he will be in his early 30s. Whether he will ultimately be released depends on whether parole authorities believe he no longer poses a risk to public safety. The process of rehabilitation for someone convicted of such a serious crime at such a young age is complex and contested. Some believe that young offenders, even those who commit murder, have the capacity to change and should be given opportunities for education, therapy, and eventual reintegration into society. Others argue that certain crimes are so heinous that they forfeit the right to a second chance. The case of Harvey Wilgus and Muhammad Umar Khan does not offer easy answers. It is a story of two young lives irrevocably altered, one ended and one imprisoned. It is a reminder of the devastating cost of violence and the failures of systems meant to protect the vulnerable. It is also a call to action, a demand that society do better in identifying warning signs, providing support to at-risk youth, and creating environments where tragedies like this cannot occur. In the end, the story of Harvey Wilgus's murder is one of the most tragic and sobering episodes of youth violence in recent Sheffield history. It stands as a stark reminder that behind every statistic about knife crime is a real person, a family, a community left to grapple with unimaginable loss. Harvey's story, though unbearably sad, carries with it a message about the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of safer futures for all young people.